So I'm happy to have here my special guest, Tina, which is a very important person in safeguarding in a church. May I ask you to introduce yourself a little bit? I will put some notes on the description about you because there's so many things what we have done.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tina Campbell. I've worked in December this year, 2023. I will have worked in safeguarding for 23 years. So I started in Scotland working in a diocesan context. Then I went to work for the Scottish Bishops. And then in January 2021, I worked for a 2-year contract with the Society of Jesus internationally. And one of the major pieces of work during that time was to audit all 73 provinces and regions of the Society of Jesus.
So you are somehow a little bit Jesuit.
Exactly, absolutely. Quite a bit of me Jesuit. But also it meant being in Rome, although in theory there is an office here for the project, but coming to Rome, and also I've been teaching here at the Gregorian for the diploma and the licentiate since 2018. That has opened doors for me, so I'm now completely independent, but I have 10 religious congregations I'm working with in safeguarding.
And what's your expertise? Like, are you psychotherapist?
Yeah, my background was in education. Theology, then education, and psychology.
And what are you doing now, right? What's the most interesting thing?
So now, some of the congregations I'm working with, I find they're all men and women, all at different stages. They're all apostolic, some are missionary. There are no contemplatives. I miss that. I'd quite like to have some contemplative congregations. Anyway, some of them are wanting help with policies. Some of them are wanting training. Some are saying, what do I do next? We have policy, we have been audited, and so I'm training their safeguarding delegates so that every province and region has a delegate. And also really reinforcing the importance of having a team. So provincial doesn't think, oh, I have a delegate, that's all right, they can cope with safeguarding, they can do everything. But it's really good, but I also experience a real commitment from the superior generals who are saying, we need to get this right. We need help to get this right. And they're seeing safeguarding as a priority, which is really encouraging to see.
And those guidelines are mostly for the protection of the minors and vulnerable?
Yes, so very much for children, vulnerable adults. But also, I like what I call the standards approach to safeguarding. Because I think if a congregation can agree on having set standards, then that's a good way for them to self-evaluate if they are meeting the standards. So standards such as, for example, responding to and caring for victims, the care and management of the accused, safe recruitment, training, and all those, so that within those standards then have a standards template, but then they can personalise it with their own charism and work and
I see maybe then that's not completely a new topic emerging from the field of the religious life. There is abuse among religious sisters abusing sisters and brothers abusing brothers, priests being abused by the priest. Do you have any thoughts or comments about this?
I think it really is important at the moment, and you're right. This isn't new. You know, it's interesting. I think some people, even in safeguarding, are thinking, "My goodness, we didn't know this was happening. This has been happening for decades." But it's only now being spoken about. So in some cultures, even in Europe, some parts of Europe, I'm finding, for example, some sisters, religious sisters, are finding the idea of a religious sister abusing another religious sister almost inconceivable. They find it too difficult. They would even find it difficult to think of a wrong, morally wrong, but consensual relationship. So if it's inconceivable, or if they don't have the language to talk about it, how can they deal with it? How can they respond to victims coming forward, for example? And I think some of it, I mean, it's interesting, we could think about, well, why is it happening? I mean, the same thing is happening in houses of formation for men as well, and seminaries, of course, we know that. Some of it, I think, is situational and opportunistic. And if we are not looking at emotional and sexual maturity during those early years of months, even months and years of formation, again, the lack of ability to self-reflect on one's sexual development as a young woman, young man, and even to address issues around attraction, even same-sex attraction or opposite-sex attraction. If those things are not talked about and explored in safety with the right language, then the cumulative effect is that there's going to be trouble with it. We know that. Yeah.
So do you think like the human development and working on the maturity, the human stuff, not the spiritualization of all this stuff, is the way how we can help the people to talk about it and to feel safe?
I think it's critically important to give the language. I know I've given a couple of webinars to international congregations, and some of the men and women have said, now you've given us a language. We didn't know how to talk about safeguarding, because I think in the past, or still in some places present, safeguarding is equated with sexual abuse. Yeah. So if there's no other abuse happening, why do we need to bother about safeguarding? Or if the other attitude, and I refer to it as looking at safeguarding through a narrow lens of child protection. So if we can look through a narrow lens of child protection and say, well, there are no children being abused, or we don't hear about children being abused, we must be getting safeguarding right. Yeah. And it's that failure, as you know, to understand how long it can take for a victim to come forward. Yeah. All the barriers to disclosure.
Decades, yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And what about the spiritual abuse? I found some new articles, and I see it very important also to...
It's very important, and the abuse of power. Yeah. And again, that's coming up quite often for me now, talking to superior generals. They're talking about issues around spiritual abuse, coercive control, happening in houses of formation, but also happening, you know, technically that can happen in general. It doesn't just, it's not just for formation. Yeah. It can happen, you know, when we've got elderly congregations as well. And I think the church needs to develop almost a better understanding of spiritual abuse, and again to speak about it. Because I think I've spoken to some religious who are quite mature, and they will look back on their lives and say, I never knew at the time, but clearly that was spiritually abusive, you know, or it was misuse of power, you know, yeah.
And how we can apply like those concepts for accountability and transparency in spiritual abuse, how it can be applied?
I think there are elements there of looking at what's the charism for a particular congregation. Okay. Has that charism over time become distorted? Is it dependent on certain key figures? We have enough evidence, sadly, even in very recent years or days, of powerful people in religious life or in a religious context, a Catholic context, engendering almost a cult-like following, you know, and the abuse of their power, and then the sexual abuse and psychospiritual abuse that's happened is incredibly distressing to see. And even when we read reports, again, it happens every time. There's a trail of evidence and a trail of people who tried to come forward or raise concerns, and it was dismissed because the person at the centre was so powerful. People either didn't believe them, or they just felt they couldn't even challenge, you know, those in leadership.
So, do you think, are we able to resolve it like the church without the society, or orders without to involve the lay people or even people who are not members of the Catholic Church, or do we need some, at least the members of those committees or something?
Absolutely, because I think as well, obviously as a layperson, I feel quite strongly about it, but I think lay people can come in having looked at it from outside as well. So they haven't grown up. I mean, I have my strong connections with the Jesuits and Ignatian spirituality, but if you come in from outside, it's easier to see things that other people don't see. And that's the same with any other safeguarding issue, even just creating safe places. Somebody, people were saying, actually, we never thought about that because we've been in this building for 40 years, And again, they may not have questioned why they're not necessarily their founder, but why those in leadership expect them to behave in a certain way. Because it's just something that happens.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, and I hope it's going to help those who are going to listen it to think about this topic, and maybe we will find a way how to do at least small steps towards safety and transparency, accountability in the church.
I keep saying we're all on the same journey, we're just at different stages.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, man.